This is Decolonizing the Music Room. We are a 501c nonprofit with the mission of centering Black, Brown, Indigenous, and Asian voices, identities, traditions, stories, and music education toward the goal of making our field more equitable. My name is Brandi Waller-Pace, and I am founder and executive director of DTMR, and I am extremely excited to be joined by my colleagues, my peers, my buds today for this panel on Blackity Black Blackness. And we are going to start by introducing ourselves, what we do, our background. So I am Brandi Waller-Pace. As I said, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am currently a PhD student in music education at the University of North Texas. I taught for 11 and a half years in Fort Worth, Texas, mostly pre-K through fifth music. And I'm also a jazz and old time musician. I present around the country, sometimes internationally. And background for me, I identify as a Black woman, and I am a Black American descendant of enslaved people. As far as I can trace my family back, we have roots in Georgia. So I am a Southern girl.
Guess I'm next.
You're next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nicholas Ryan Gant. My pronouns are he, his, amazing. And I am Black. Um, so I guess that qualifies me to be on this Blackity Black panel, or if there's any qualifiers. I am a music educator. This is my fourth year actually teaching in the classroom, but I've been a teaching artist prior to that for about 10 years. Um, and I'm also a working musician here in New York City. Sung background for a few artists you may have heard of. Um, been in the studio with a few artists you may have heard of. Vocal coach for some record labels here, and then I'm an independent recording artist myself. And I teach middle school currently. I've taught high school music, and I teach private voice lessons on the side to get that extra, that extra paper. It's the hustle here in New York. So, yeah, I said I'm Black, so that's my background.
And Nicholas is our vice president on the board of DTMR as well. You may have
Am.
seen him on our social media, in our group, on our website,
That is me, the
and we
vice
get to
president.
present together sometimes.
This is fun for having me.
I just love getting to hear you sing, Nicholas.
You're so sweet. Stop it.
You should look him up if you haven't. My name is Melyssa Stone, she, her pronouns. I'm currently located in the Seattle area, and this is my first year as an administrator. I am an assistant principal at a middle school, and before that, I was teaching and working in public schools. This is year, I think, 13 for me as a music educator, teaching the whole K-12 range. I am a string player. I am also a performer, both choral and a jazz soloist. I am a Black woman and a descendant of Ephraim Wells, who is the first free man in my family. I am a descendant of the enslaved, and as far back as we go, our roots are in Talbot County, Maryland.
Nice. My name is Lenny Novias. I am a Black Dominican man here in New York City. I have been teaching music for 5 years within different underprivileged schools here in New York City and charter networks, and just been having a whole lot of fun trying out a lot of different things. And yeah, I grew up in Washington Heights, New York, but my family's from Dominican Republic, and my family can be traced in the same little village in San Francisco de Macorís for about like 4 or 5 generations. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I am Syreeta Neal. I am a singer-songwriter born and raised in Toronto, Canada. I live in Los Angeles now. I am of Black American and Italian descent. My mother is Italian Canadian. My father is Black American, born in New Orleans. So on my father's side, I am also a descendant of enslaved people. As far back as we know, New Orleans is where our family it's as far back as we've been able to trace. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am an upper elementary music teacher, as well as I teach privately. I teach voice, guitar, piano, ukulele, and sort of got into education, music education later in life, transitioned into that once I had my son and I couldn't tour as much anymore, and decided and realized that I fell in love with it. Particularly racial justice within music education is my real passion. I think that's it for me.
I'm Audrey Melzer. My pronouns are she and her. I am from Ohio. I'm living and working in Ohio, very Midwest. Woo! I teach orchestra grades 5 through 12, but I also have Suzuki training for bass. So I am a classical double bassist, string specialist. I'm a vocalist, and I dabble on other instruments as well. My family is descendant of enslaved people on both sides. My mother is American. She's African-American woman from Alabama, and their family came up to Ohio. And my father is from St. Lucia in the Caribbean. And so we have not tried to trace our family. We know some things here and there, like for instance, my maiden name, John, is Welsh. I know that. And I know that there were loving relationships, supposedly, along those lines, but that we kind of it's just all tales. We don't really talk about it very much. So, oh, and then my passions are, of course, orchestral education, but trying to bring a more diverse thought process to how we approach orchestra in the classroom. And so that's my passion.
Wow, what a panel. My name is Franklin Willis. I am from Nashville, Tennessee. I serve as an elementary music coach, instructional coach here in my district. And this is year 12 for me of teaching and learning elementary music and middle school general and choir music. He and him, that's my pronouns. My work is centered around finding new and innovative ways to build engagement and participation with our students of color, with white kids, with whoever is in the space, right? Getting them to engage with music through hip hop, through pop, through whatever avenue we find ourselves in with our children. Now in this instructional coach role, I find myself working more with adults than with students. So finding my intersectionality and making sure that I'm not always the angry Black man, but always being able to hear different perspectives. And so I see music education on a different side and from a different view now than when I just was in the classroom. So I'm excited to be here today and just to learn and chat with these brilliant people on this panel.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to piggyback off of what Syreeta said about being a generational blues musician. And I was wondering what cultural musical traditions you identify with, whether it's through your family or through your training or just finding out historically. Something that's been really enriching for me is getting into old time music and finding how much Black history and Black contribution there is to string band traditions, whether like the actual creation of the banjo by enslaved Africans in the Americas, to fiddle traditions, all kinds of playing techniques, all these figures, and then of course having studied jazz and knowing how much Black American history is in there really resonates with me. Something I hadn't picked up on until I was an adult. I have family down from Plains, Georgia, super small town in South Georgia. Most people know it because Jimmy Carter is from there. And the town's like Jimmy Carter's family, my family. That's kind of the town. But, you know, we go for our family reunions, and my parents always joke about like I'm the musical one and they're not musical, even though they can carry a tune and all that. But we go down to the reunions and somebody's on drums and somebody's on bass and somebody's playing this. And not only was that amazing to see, but as an adult getting into music and thinking about the study of it in a certain way, just like even listening to like the call and response, because my family's church is an AME church. And some of you might be familiar with the history of the denomination. Google's free, I'll let y'all get on it. But there's some really beautiful vocal traditions associated with that I realize I've been hearing all my life and not even really processing. So what are some traditions that you guys feel really tied to culturally?
Well,
I'm just not.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
saying, because you were mentioning my family background. So I am a third generation blues musician. My grandfather was a blues musician. My father and all 9 of his siblings are also blues musicians. And then I have a bunch of siblings who also play. And so for me, that was, I always say it's one of those things in my family where if I would have come home and said I wanted to be a doctor, they would have like disowned me. But so I feel a very deep connection to blues music, the history of blues music, and also contemporary blues that has so much funk fusion going on. And I feel really pulled to that and wanting to kind of share that with my students and my community.
I was gonna piggyback onto what Brandi was saying, because I too am interested in roots music, string band music, and I only recently, I want to say within the last 5 to 10 years, even found out that that was a thing. I didn't know that Black people had history with string band music because that was never a part of my education, especially not in Ohio. So that's what I've been digging into a little bit more and trying to share with my students. But as far as what I really identify with, it's mostly the music from my Caribbean side. So soca, calypso, reggae. I grew up listening to all of that in our house. I grew up dancing to it at a very young age, dancing to it. And when my father wanted my sister and I to make a band, that was the first stuff we started playing, like Gregory Isaac's Night Nurse in our band, in our jam band in the basement. So that's where part of my music comes from. But then the other part is from religion, which is interesting because I'm not religious. So my father's people and my mother's people are all Seventh-day Adventists, and they were huge church families in the same church in Cleveland, Ohio. And they're, as a matter of fact, they're still well known. Like when people see me, they'll say, "Oh, you're a John," or "Oh, you're a Moore." And they know that because of those two big families. So I grew up listening, not necessarily to gospel, but hymns. So I used to sight read the hymnal for my piano lessons and all that. And I think that's where I fell in love with the tonality of like classical music and chorales because of those hymns. And that's why I became a classical musician. But that the way that we sing and the way that, you know, church performers really get down, that's deeply embedded in me as well.
Sure. I have a deep connection to, I guess you could say, gospel music, or kind of like Audrey. Like my family was really rooted in the church, like, but we haven't really researched past my grandmother because we were always told she was adopted, even though we found out through ancestry she was adopted by her sister. So like there's like all these like, you know, things that are coming up, but she went to the same church, you know, her entire life, like from, you know, from birth. And then even when she remarried, she married a minister from that same church. And so all 11 of my mother's siblings were there, and, you know, they sang, and my grandmother played piano for the church. And so that's sort of where my, you know, my musical heritage comes from. And then, but I didn't really study, you know, Black music, you know, growing up in, you know, a predominantly white Hispanic area. I didn't really study Black music until I was old enough to, you know, really understand that, like, there was a such thing. Like, obviously I had heard of spirituals and things like that, but I didn't, like, to me, it was just music. So I was just kind of like, you know, kind of going with the flow. And I didn't study, you know, like Black music traditions until I had already started studying classical music traditions. So it's sort of like, that was like kind of like the gateway for me to understand that it was something to study. I don't know if that sounds like weird, but it was like, that was kind of like how I got to studying, you know, Black music traditions and going deeper into spirituals, and then, you know, like the progression of how things went here as far as like Black music here in the Americas.
I'm really tied to. I like hearing all you guys speak a little bit first, because, you know, I think a lot of us really identify with that, you know, receiving classical music, like sort of or developing proficiency in classical music first, and then starting to articulate on, like, wait, who am I, like, later, and then digging into the musical, into more Black musical traditions. And that's the same thing that happened to me, because I grew up with, well, my family's Catholic, and when my mom and dad immigrated to Washington Heights, the church was, you know, just the community spot for us Dominicans. So, you know, Dominican religious Catholic music is just like this new puzzle box for me, because during the 1940s, I believe, we had like a dictator, Rafael Trujillo, who really like just shut down the island from receiving any outside influences. And so what started happening once he was dethroned, once he was done, is that, you know, Dominican music traditions started within the church, started adopting like popular culture ballads and stuff, and just looping it into the songs to make them more catchy, to, you know, pass on the little like seeds of like American or international culture and put them into our songs. So like lately I've been sort of just dissecting that within a lot of like reharmonized hymnals that seem to be passed around and, like, you know, conglomerated into all these different influences. But it's so funny being Caribbean because you always have that firm antagonism of like having the dance music that you don't talk about in church, and then the church music that you don't talk about at the club, even though both of them probably sound like they would be on the same playlist at iTunes. So, you know, so in addition to like that, we also have like, I'm also richly connected to a whole tradition of merengue, bachata, and salsa that has been developed on my island. Like Juan Luis Guerra, I have a poster of him. I bow down every single night. Like, but you know, and he's, you know, that's the music that you would hear at the festival, where, you know, you would like at any church festivals where clearly you would celebrate a lot of religious things, but you would also have a lot of dancing, moving music with, you know, it's like, wait, this is a religious festival, but you're playing bachatas too, which are hypersexualized. What's going on? That's just Caribbean culture for you. So, yeah, that antagonism. And, you know, classical music for me, like, it started out with, when I had interest in music, it started out as classical because I was trying to distance myself away as far from my culture as possible. And so, like, you know, and like coming into my own, like, as a music teacher has really forced me to just has forced me to grow out my hair, to grow, like, you know, and to start really accepting my blackness. And now it's just like, I feel like I'm the one having to play catch up. I mean, all of you are really like accomplished musicians, and I'm just still sort of figuring out where I am with that, you know? It's like, I'm so embarrassed of classical music, but I need to catch up so much when it comes to playing merengue, bachata, salsas, like, and everything in my Black music tradition. So that's me.
It's funny you talk about how you had those traditions that like never really met up, but everybody knew about it. As far back as my family goes, my ancestors are buried at the church that Harriet Tubman attended. So like that religion thread runs deep. And sort of similar to Brandi, we've got a lot of AME people and a lot of like leaders, like pastors and reverends in my family. And so gospel music has always been like a really consistent through line. And it's funny talking about like what you sang along to as a kid with friends and colleagues, because for me it was Take Six, like all of those complex harmonies versus I don't know what else was playing on the radio, but it wasn't Take Six. And so that like intersection of religious music and jazz has been such a huge part of my own formation, like my musical formation, in the way that I think about things. Like it wasn't Christmas until Quincy Jones' Hallelujah chorus came on, and like we play that one and not the one from Handel. So just all of those ways that like for me growing up, those intersections have really rooted themselves. And I mean, the story's the same in terms of the classical piece in undergrad, particularly. I remember I was told when I said I wanted to do jazz for my senior recital, it was like, well, you've already done your legit stuff, so that's fine, is the language that I received around that. And then of course, you know, knocked it out of the park. But I also was fortunate to have a Black professor who, even in the midst of like learning more about the classical harmonic analysis and things like that, like taught about William Grant Still and taught about Florence Price and the Chevalier de Saint-Georges. So I feel like we're all singing the same tune, but that's my take on it.
Well, for me, my first interaction with music was my mom and my dad, right? Getting up on Saturday mornings, we had to clean the house, and my mom would have the Motown going. She would have, you know, my dad would have Snoop and Dre in the 90s. You know, hip hop was really big, but they were not music teachers. They were just living their lives and being them. And so I can vividly remember family reunion, my mom making me get up in front of everybody and sing Montel Jordan, "This Is How We Do It." And so everybody is just like, up, we singing, and it's just, that was music for me. And then during the week, we went to church, Bible study, and then after Bible study, you go to choir rehearsal, youth choir. And every second or third Sunday, we would sing the song we had been working on, and we learned those songs by rote. We didn't get sheet music, right? There was no follow the vocal line. It was, I'm gonna sing it, and then you sing it back to me. And if it don't match, you got to keep doing it until it's right. So that was my experience with music making. And then as I got into high school, I auditioned to be in the madrigals, right? And so I found out that I wasn't a tenor. I thought I was a tenor because that's what I sung in the church choir. I was a baritone bass. And so you're a bass, you sing this, here's the bass clef. So I went through like a culture shock. But through that experience, I learned that I want to teach music. But then going to audition, that was a mess for me. Like, here's this hymnal that you were talking about, Audrey. Sing the bass line. Here's your first note. And I'm looking like fish in the water, fish out of water, didn't know what to do. And so through that experience, I learned that I was not up to par you know, to meet those standards. So my freshman year and my sophomore year were tough with sight singing and music theory. But if you put me in front of a group of people and you put me in front of a group of kids, I could win them over. I could build relationships. I could do that. And so my colleagues, while they could tell you that's a 1 chord to a 6, to a 5, to a 2, they could do all that. But if you put them in front of a group of kids, they would freeze and didn't know what to do. And so a lot of the teaching characteristics that I have in music making comes from my mom, my dad, my family, my church. So all of those things, I forgot about those because the Western European way told me that I had to be something else. And I know we're going to get into that. But what I found was that first year of teaching, it wasn't what I learned in my undergrad that saved me. It was the things that brought me to music altogether, right? And so when we talk about spirituals, I got so blessed to be at University of Tennessee at Chattanooga with Professor Roland Carter, who, you know, exposed me to like, hey, these are spirituals. This is where they come from. They're not all sad songs. They may have been birthed in pain, but in that pain, there's joy, there's hope, there's jubilation. And so I was like, my eyes were opened up to, wow, this is Black music. This is the origins of which we came. And so through that, I've just built a love for just our music because we are the creators. We create some magnificent stuff in some of the most dire circumstances. And we make music and we make art and we make poetry and we take that and we build culture. So that's just kind of like my background. I know I kind of went all over, but that's just kind of my experience.
Yo, yeah. So first of all, shout out to Saturday morning cleaning. Parliament Funkadelic and Earth, Wind and Fire and like all these things that are still such a core part of me. Like I didn't even think of that right away. And then Frank said, I was like, oh yeah, my parents are the reason I know this and this and this and this. But I really wanted to piggyback off of you talking about that forgetting and remembering, right? Because I feel like we're all expressing certain things and experiencing that separation and having to maybe leave some stuff at the door. So I wanted to hear about your experiences of like the forgetting and the remembrance, or like the relearning. Even something as simple as one thing I loved when I started old time was you know, I had been in more traditional music classes and a choral kid all the way through college, went to Howard HU for
you know,
yeah, for jazz studies. And that was like the beginning of like a little awakening and growth. But you know, like we know certain conventions are pretty pervasive. So I get to old time music and I'm like, I get to sing in this vocal tone and this is the appropriate vocal tone. And I can just kind of do my thing as far as that goes, right? Even something as simple as like going to school for years and being told like this is what a beautiful voice is, and knowing that is completely disconnected from so many of the cultural traditions that we talked about. I hear my family sing down in Plains and they do like this y'all know that real old folks belt and that vibrato that's like, it's beautiful, but like we don't grow up in school learning that's a beautiful way to sing. So anyway, that's my piece for that.
I have to take a minute and just say that I'm kind of near tears right now because I am so envious of all of you for having the educations that you guys got. I did not get any of that. Like, I am starting to experience Black music, the music that I grew up with, and starting to take it seriously now in my 40s, because it was never presented to me as something that was good enough to learn. So like, I wish like the education that I got in college was a good one. I mean, I learned how to teach. I learned teaching methods. I already knew how to teach, but I learned teaching methods and I became a better musician, but I became a better classical musician. I wasn't allowed to do jazz studies. I wanted to, but that there wasn't time in the schedule. And I was required to do all these other things. And I was never, like, I didn't have music professors telling me about Black composers. I had to learn that on my own after, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was never reflected in my music education, and that's off. Like I should be working on a master's, but I'm putting it off because I can't go into the space now. So like, yeah, I completely identify with the unlearning and the remembering all the stuff, the music that I had before, and trying to go back there now. Like I used to play by ear all the time, and then I stopped when I went to college. And I used to, I mean, I can scat and I can improvise vocally, and I stopped doing that because somehow I was basically told that that's not what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to be able to read the music. And so that's what I did, and that was my focus. But I am envious. I wish to God I went to a place like you guys went to school, because that would have changed everything for me.
Yeah.
It's so wild how there are so many ways in which Black students can feel erased or feel small, right? Because that's really something that you're grieving, and that's a huge chunk of you that got sort of silenced. And I find on the flip side of it, the level of imposter syndrome I have in education spaces, because I grew up learning through family tradition and feeling like that's not a legitimate form of instruction or form of teaching. And so it's just, it is really heartbreaking to see that that these are all valid forms, and for some, well, we know why, but for some reason, you know, as Black educators, as Black musicians, as Black people, we still feel like there are these big parts of us that either get taken or get squashed or get silenced from all angles.
And you know, like Audrey, I feel like I feel like when you started talking and started like really mourning like the loss of those musical abilities, I feel like such a deep connection with that. Especially going to, I can remember vividly going into like my auditions for my undergrad and saying, well, I know how to sing this and this and this song, and them being like, but those aren't in repertoire, so we're not doing that. And like I had songs on backup just in case, and it clearly worked out. But I mean, it's still like it, you know, there's a part of that I'm learning now, that's that sort of racial gaslighting of like, you don't really need a connection to your culture to be a great musician. Like it holds you back, and it holds you back because these musicians can't do this, this, and this. And I fell right for it, and I willingly gave that up. That's probably the only difference. I was like very deliberate in like trying to erase my Blackness because that is what the system told me, because that is what the schedules told me, that's what the logistics told me, that's what the teachers told me, these were the courses that were offered. They'll give you every single thing in the book to justify you just like literally erasing the color of your skin when it comes to everywhere else. And you know, that's so I'm really here with you on that.
Audrey, I feel like you tapped right into this like ancestral vein of grief that for African Americans is such a deep and historical grief. And I had this conversation with my uncle yesterday, who's doing a lot of study around our family history, and he was talking about how his father, my grandfather, passed away before he could know all of these things about our own history in America, and how like that's a part of what was taken from us, are those stories, that oral tradition from the moment we arrived here. If they take away your language, you're not able to carry on that tradition. If your songs are not present, if your songs aren't present in a classroom, then you wouldn't know that you inherit that. You wouldn't know that you are a recipient of that. And that's one of the ways that our system like takes the finished product and doesn't value that the fact that it's passed on orally or from an elder or from someone who knows those songs and that music, like that's what makes it so rich. And we like it's a counter narrative to how we are trained to teach in our teacher ed programs. And so to finally get to recognize and deprogram some of that is returning to those like ancestral parts of ourselves that for so long have been silenced because they've taken away that language. So I feel you.
Yeah, that through line, right, is gone. Y'all made me think of two things. One, even, you know, like Black people can thrive within classical music forms, but even our representation there historically is just like, you know, so bringing that in is one thing. And then it makes me think of Syreeta. So Syreeta, third generation jazz musician, I always joke, Syreeta knows everybody under the sun. She's been everywhere. Like she is killing it. Her family is killing it. And I've seen music educators in music educator spaces try to talk over her, argue her down about blues because of the way that blues has been represented within traditional curriculum. And it's like, here's like a literal living bearer of the tradition, not even just from a cultural tie, but from like a practitioner perspective. And just an idea of like the attempt to be like, you got to leave this stuff at the door. And then we're going to hand it back to you in the way it didn't even come in the first place. It's like, excuse me.
and then we somehow we internalize that their incompetence as being our shortcomings, right? So it was taught to us in a substandard way. And because we don't adhere to that substandard form of watered down blues, watered down jazz. I mean, I have quit every jazz program that I have, well, except one, but most higher ed jazz programs that I've done, I ended up quitting because I was like, I don't see myself, I don't hear myself, I don't see my people or hear my people in this instruction. And I am now feeling the imposter syndrome because I'm not able to give these instructors what they want. But I know that what they want isn't what it actually is supposed to be. It's that whole mind trip.
Oh God, yes. Yes, Sarita, I want to just jump on there because I had a jazz bass professor. Like I was trying to learn how to improvise finally, and this was a few years back. And you know, it was like a quick, like 1 week thing. I jumped in, I learned the chart. I was trying to figure it out. They made me improvise on the spot. I didn't really like what I did, but whatever, I did it. And he came up to me and he was like, no, that wasn't right. Like it just didn't have the right amount of soul or whatever. And I felt so bad. Yes, because in my mind, I'm thinking I've been trained to take whatever the professor says seriously, right? Oh, I didn't do it right. Is that really what it was? No, it wasn't that. It's just that he didn't appreciate what I did or whatever. And so as a result, I've not really jumped back in as much as I would have liked. But I found myself, even as a grown woman, trying to put myself make myself fit his idea of what jazz was in that moment, when I probably already knew it. I just needed more time and more experience. I needed more than a week and a few days to jump into something I had never really done before. But no, yeah, he completely made me feel like I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And I was a lost cause.
I'm so sorry. I can't say thank you enough to like my higher professors who hopefully like catch wind of all this work we're doing. Like, we know that Black people are not the only people that participate in jazz as a Black American art form that spread throughout all of America and beyond. But for me, it felt there was something powerful in having like literal reflection in almost every aspect of what I was learning and having it talked about in a certain way. Or even I'll shout out to Dr. Thomas J. Flagg, classical piano department, who made sure that I was getting all my Black classical training alongside white Western European classical training, just like all these things. And I'm so sorry, Audrey, because I recognize that level of mourning and separation there. And we all know like whiteness is pervasive and we have to deal with it everywhere. But people who don't have the positionality we have, just like that level of like, I just literally see myself there, right? In addition to talking to the history, having Afro and African American history as a core class. It wasn't an elective. It wasn't a unit. It was literally what every single music major had to take, right? So yeah, I can't say enough. Even if I acted like a little snot at Howard, it's kicking in, y'all. It's kicking in, Professor Kenitra Miller.
Could I jump in right there though, Brandi, on the same side, like being on the classical side at Howard, it was kind of like a different experience for me. Not to talk bad about Howard, but I got a lot of the you have to choose. Like even once I got to Howard, like of course like my white teachers in high school are going to tell you that you have to either sing gospel or classical. You can't do both. They're going to tell you that, right? But when you get to Howard, like you think that there's going to be some sort of, like some sort of like marriage between the two. And for me, it wasn't. Like it wasn't as traumatic as it was in high school, like hearing it from white people, but like they wouldn't let me study jazz. Like I had to like sneak and just like, like kick it with the jazz cats in the practice rooms, because like they were very adamant about like, the trajectory of a classical singer and like what you had to do. And so it wasn't as traumatic like once I got there, because I guess because I had already made up in my mind that I wasn't gonna be an opera singer, which is kind of like a waste of thousands of dollars. But at the same time, it was like kind of like a little bit disheartening, like trying to figure out, exactly what I was supposed to do. And so I really wanted to like learn more about jazz. And so, I did, but not from the teachers, because they wouldn't let us do both. And I don't know if that has to do more with like the, like the whitewashing of
like the classical model period,
like, I don't know
maybe.
if it had to do with that or if that was just, I don't know. I don't really know what that was, but
I would venture to say like conservatory, like that European conservatory model that spread in university study in the US, probably, it touched everywhere, right? Because it's just so interesting to put the dynamics of your experience beside mine. And I've done that with other Howard music grads when we talked about like if you're on the jazz side, this, if we were on such and such side, this. Lenine, I'm so sorry I cut you off.
No, I mean, I feel like disseminating like all this stuff, it's so interesting how academia sort of like starts to attach like commonalities and systems and teach those as truth. And, when the fact is like, no one really knows what they're talking about. And I mean, you see all these opera singers, with their trajectory, like, famous opera singers that like frankly have sung all the roles at the same time with their companies. Like, like the same people that would sing Queen of the Night would probably do like soubrette roles at the same time. So it's like, but it's so convenient for education to be about putting people in boxes when that happens, because it's easy it's easy to report growth, it's easy to report data, it's easy to report all this stuff. And that's the tragic part of it, is that there's no sense of like everyone's going to feel like a trailblazer, like everyone's going to do things that are outside of a specific norm. But that's not what education's about now. Like it's not what education has been. And when you come from like, when your system is riddled with white supremacy, like, it's just gonna keep going in that what essentialist direction, where it's like you can only do one thing. Everyone reminding you that you can't do both things, that your career is gonna look like everybody else's career, and that's a good thing. Like, it's so upsetting to see that everywhere, really, and to be like a Black person in a classroom, figuring out how you're going to consolidate marrying that system within your instruction, and then also marrying your identity with that. I consistently feel like I'll just walk into a classroom and I'll always feel that I don't know what the hell I'm gonna do, just because of that like existentialist struggle of like, how much do I support and how much do I feel like I am,
I think it's time to turn to like our teacher experiences in music ed and stuff now. Can I tell y'all the first thing I'm thinking, like, being Black in the spaces, tokenization is like, I wonder who's going to watch this and be like, are they going to give us some songs to use in the classroom?
I was actually thinking that some poor person's going to come up here thinking that we're going to give them lesson ideas.
And we're not. Sorry, we're not packaging a lesson. No. We just really want you to understand, because we're Black in America and there's lots of us and your students in American history, and it's just all super duper important. That idea, shout out to Franklin, because I had a real good conversation with Franklin a while back, and he was like, we don't just do your classroom management and we don't just do your race seminars and stuff like that. Like, we do a lot of stuff, but I wanted to see if you were willing to talk about your experiences with that, because you present widely, and a lot of us go to conferences and give sessions and all of that.
Well, the idea that when you hire a Black person to come in, we have to do culturally relevant, or we have to do hip hop, or like, yes, we do that. We do it all. Let me just say that.
By necessity.
Right? It's not because we want to do it all, it's because we have to do it all, right? We have to pass through these metrics of, oh yeah, he's a great singer. Oh, he's a good musician. Oh, yep, his kids are pretty good at the Core Festival. They got Superior. Now we can bring him in to do this, right?
As folks will suss you out in the way they wouldn't suss other people out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got to check all the boxes and more. And I think now we're getting to a place where organizations are taking a chance, right? They're not going to hire all of us, but they'll bring in one or two to see how it goes, right? And so during these presentations, it's been funny to get feedback. And if you don't know who you are, it could really play tricks on you, right? But to get feedback like, oh my goodness, the session was so engaging and we got so much and this, and this. And it's like, this is what I do. Like, right? This is who I am. This is how I reach kids. And the other part I want to say is, just because we come and we do these presentations and we share with you these experiences of what worked in our classroom, it might not work in your classroom.
You better tell them, Franklin.
Several reasons. One of them is you haven't spent the life experience with this music like we have. We know it, we breathe it, we have it. And so when we give it to our kids, we're giving it to them in an authentic space. And they know we've studied this music throughout the year. It's not just Black History Month, now we're gonna sing some jazz pieces. No, we've been warming up to jazz when you came in here day one. So a lot of the times I find that teachers, they sprinkle in some Black music. And then when the kids don't respond the way that they want them to, it's because the activity doesn't work. No, it's not the activity, it's you.
They be sprinkling in these songs like it's like poorly seasoned chicken. It ain't right. It's not enough. It's not enough. You need to add more. Okay. You can't just put a little bit. Add more pepper.
Yeah.
And it's almost, Franklin, what you bring up is like were you listening to us to learn, or were you listening so you could commodify and package a thing that then you could just flip,
It's
right?
always that though. Mm-hmm.
And when
it always feels like it's that.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it does become more about the teacher than the children, right? Like when I start every class with our little brain dance so that the children are not wiling out, right? So we do this series of brain dance that I learned in my ORF training. Shout out to Carrie Lynn Nichols, my amazing ORF instructor. And that's my opportunity to just, some days the brain dance may be done to the Quincy Jones Soulful Celebration, Handel's Messiah. And some days and it's Earth, Wind, and Fire. Some days it's a soca song. Some days it's Savannah Grass. And the coolest thing is that every single song that I've selected, there will be one child whose eyes light up because they recognize it from their home. My mom plays that song. My dad plays that song. And that's the connection. That's the authentic connection. I'm not showing you something you don't know. I'm tapping in to something that you already have a connection to.
I was gonna say that there was another layer to my story about the bass professor, because he was actually during that week, he wasn't my professor, he was my colleague, because I was hired to be a part of this institute for studio bass, because I'm a specialist in Suzuki bass. So I know how to start the little babies on the baby basses. And so I was there working with our young kids, and I even conducted that year. And like the full bass orchestra. And that little jazz snippet was a part of the performance that they wanted us to do. And they had just kind of thrown a couple of us into it. And so I was unprepared, but I was also willing to try. And afterwards, my colleague made that comment to me. So that's the other part of it. Even when you're there in a role where they're equal, there's always a way for them to put you down, to the point where when I conducted, I've been conducting for years. This is my 16th year teaching. And I've been conducting for years. I was looking for their approval. I hate that. I hate that I was looking for their approval. Now, like, I know how to conduct. I have taken ensembles to contests and gotten superior ratings. Like, I know how to do this job. But I was looking for their approval because they were collegiate. And I felt like I had imposter syndrome at that point. That's something I fight with all the time. So
there's this part in Lovecraft Country where this character
yes, I love that show.
It's so weird though. I'm like, it tells some truth in like a really weird way. And if you're not sci-fi, like, I'll get it, but you still need to watch it, is what I say. But I'm thinking of the part where Hippolyta goes into that other realm and she creates a name for herself. It was so powerful for me. And going back, Brandi, to what you were talking about how, like, in those spaces where we're presenting and people want like lesson plans or us to speak on this, that, or the other, like going in with a completely different premise, like, nobody's there to tell everyone the Black way. No one is there to, help fix whatever inequities or systemic racism exists, because on the other end of that, I've been in spaces where if I went in, like, you reach this point where you are no longer saying what they want to hear, and how quickly that changes, right? Whether it's like not enough or it's too much. And what it looks like to be a Black educator, defining for myself who I am in those spaces, and not because there's some like deliverable that people are going to get at the end, but because there's an invitation to watch another way of entering into educational spaces with Black and Brown and Indigenous and Asian kids at the center. Like, sometimes people don't know what to do with that, but I see that in so many of the presentations that y'all have done. And I, like, we all see when people can't handle it one way or the other, and the decision to continue to like live in the truth of who we are as Black educators is powerful, but it's not is not always pretty.
There's always
That
a
also
wall. Sorry, go ahead, Lenny.
This is okay. Oh, I'm sorry. That just, I feel like that's such a wild, like, two contradictions existing in the same way. I'm sure you're all used to that. You're Black and a musician, and it feels like it's impossible to do both at the same time, or impossible for a lot of people to understand that you can be both at the same time. And one of those things that happens at the same time is like you can see the poverty of Black voice, and when it comes to music education in general, because there's like the two extremes there. There's either like you are rewarding me as a Black person for literally breathing, for like the natural things that I'm already doing, or you are like, you are just shutting me out of the conversation. So like there's very little in between, and that's just what happens when you know there's not enough of something. You either want all of it at the same time, or you just don't, or you just want to like shut what you need out so that you can survive. So it's like it's so hostile to encounter that as a Black person within like education spaces in general. It's just like, wow, he's so engaging. Like one day, you know, my principal will just be like, wow, I don't understand. You're just so engaging. You really relate to those kids. That's how they put it. And I'm just like, I don't need to, like, thanks. I mean, I don't need
to be myself.
Yeah, just doing me.
I put a lot of work into, well, I do put a lot of work into my hair, but yeah, I clearly put a lot of work into my complexion. Thank you. And then there's that other time where it's like, oh no, you need to organize your lesson plans better, and they'll put it in a way so that, you know, it's like this simple task, but like you don't know how to do it right because you're not doing it the way that they would want you, or because you're, like Melyssa just said, you're crossing the line. It's too Black for us, you know.
There's this wall, and I always have this sense of you know, as music educators, we're generally in white dominated spaces. That's why this panel is amazing, because we're generally surrounded by like white people in the construct of whiteness, because we know race is socially constructed, history, blah, 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 blah. DTMR talks about it all the time. But this idea of, I just like, no, when am I going to hit that wall and push like a little too into discomfort? And then I'm going to get some violent, I'm going to name it like it is, because I mean, you talked about that just now. It's a violent action or some kind of shutdown or something. And beyond that, sometimes a shutdown will be like, but I'm an ally. And that is the shutdown, right? Like, I'm going to shut you down and I'm going to tell you I am an ally. Like, it's almost like, how dare you counter me? The times I've been told very politely that DTMI was doing too much and I was saying too much and doing too much, and I needed to take more stock of how I was putting the things I was saying, right? And it's just it's so harmful, because on one hand, that's why DTMR exists, so we can have spaces like this, but we acknowledge that right now we're within systems in some form or fashion, right? And knowing the imbalance of power dynamics and knowing all it takes is for like the one person to be like, too Black for me today, I'm shutting it down, and it has a real impact. And it's hard, because I'm an educator and I work with educators, but I have Black children in grade school, right? So every time I see an educator and it's just ugly, I know, what if that's my kid's teacher going to school and giving that ugly? So
Yep.
That's why I can't let stuff go. That's why when people, you know, people say all the time, like, you know, don't have the energy for that. Don't give. I'm like, no, but this isn't just like a social media argument. That, like, these people are taking these beliefs to our children. And the other thing, Brandi, when you talk about hitting that wall, what I find a lot is the wall becomes, you're uncomfortable with where I took the conversation. So now the conversation has to be about managing your feelings around the facts that we just laid out. And that is not something that I find pops up in these kinds of panels as much, right? With people who are racially minoritized. We don't have the luxury of being like, stop, I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm literally shaking with rage. Somebody calm me down. Like, we don't get to do that. And so I have zero patience for it.
Because that muscle is big on us, because it has to be. Like, we're just living, right?
Talk about the idea of being uncomfortable when, as a Black person, walking into a space and you don't see nobody that looks like you, especially in music education. Can we talk about having to learn French, German, Russian, all of these languages to meet the standard to get the degree? Like, can we talk about how we are uncomfortable in that space? But
we are uncomfortable 24/7.
But then when we ask them to do a little work, right? We're not saying go get a degree in it. We're saying listen to some hip hop, listen to some jazz.
Consider it's all real valid music, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Google it.
Google it.
We ask them to Google it.
People get mad that you want them to just Google.
Yeah.
We ask you to do that, and then that uncomfortable feeling that you're feeling, that's what we experience 24/7.
Can we just, like, y'all have, let's talk about hair. Y'all beautiful hair people. I've been working in the minority numbers wise and having to deal with who's going to reach up in my hair. Is it a teacher? Is it a parent? I've been at a conference talking to a colleague, and somebody just like came up and just got, like that. Like, it's not even just like the tradition discomfort. It's literally like being racialized Black in the space and what historically it means to have a Black body that is constructed as not really belonging to me in the context of like all American history, right? We're bodies and commodities like that. That is like a historic thing. And people can say however far, whatever is in the past, right? But like, attitudes and legacies of attitudes are passed down, especially if you fail to be explicit in disrupting them, right? And so there's a reason that like people will feel it's comfortable to do this to my head. And I have never considered like, oh, I like your hair, I should put my hand in it. What is that?
I made a very purposeful statement today in wearing a head wrap. I did that on purpose. And the reason I did that on purpose is because, again, this is going to be the third time I say this. I live in Ohio, and this is not common, at least not in the circles that I work in and whatnot. I'm in the Cleveland area, and I teach in Oberlin. This is not something that you usually see, right? So I have started in the last few years, wearing head wraps. I've got all kinds of different kinds. I wear bigger earrings. I present myself in more of an Afrocentric way, like not because it's just because it's me and it always has been me, but I would purposely straighten my hair. I was always nervous when I wore my natural hair out. I even had like a TWA. I had like a little short afro once, and I felt like so nervous that someone was going to say something. But yeah, I have decided to, when I go into these spaces now, I'm going to have my braids. I'm going to have my head wrap. I'm going to do it on purpose, and if it makes you uncomfortable, that's fine. And also don't touch me. Because it's really uncommon. When I go to the Ohio Music Educators Association conference, I am usually one of like a handful of Black people in the entire convention. Yeah. And then when it has to do with orchestra, just me. I once sat in a session where they were literally trying to talk about how to get more students of color, more Black students involved in music and in orchestra. And I'm looking at them, and finally I was like, look around the room. I'm the only one here. That's your problem right there. Figure that out first.
Yeah.
I feel like the politics of Black hair needs to be included in DEI trainings for teachers.
The times I've had to tell a coworker, don't reach out, don't do that.
Not
only is it like dehumanizing, but like I know the effort that went into that baby's hair looking like that. Why would you
Mm-hmm.
literally rub their head like that? That really is a yeah.
When my son, I think he was not even 3 years old. My son has had dreadlocks since he was 2.5, 3. And I had to teach him, and I have like a little video of him, the mantra, I don't want you to touch my hair. He had to learn how to say that at 3 years old because of the amount of people that would invade his space and touch his hair and ask questions and do you even wash it and all of these things. And that's, and this is commonplace. And when it would happen to him at school, the response he got from teachers were, one of his teachers said, oh, I totally get it because I'm a redhead and I remember people making fun of my hair too. And see those faces in the boxes? Exactly. Yeah. So it just made me think of the politics of Black hair. It's so real.
If you want to talk about culturally responsive, like that's where you have to take it. I don't want to cut anybody off.
No, I had an experience like even as a man, right? With shorter hair, it's still something that intrigues them, and this is like a colleague that like I considered a friend, or maybe I shouldn't tell the story, but I don't know. But it was a really awkward situation because I was like, don't do that, right? And they got offended, and I wasn't like mean about it. I was just like, don't do that, And
how are you gonna get offended for touching me when I told you not to touch me?
Don't touch me.
I was like, don't do that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was like a pet, like feel like trying to, and I was like, don't do that. Like, you my girl, like we cool, but don't do that. And then like it was like, but I was just and then it becomes like a whole like they're the victim thing.
Feelings.
Like and I'm like, no, you can't do it. And then I explained. I had to, and then there we go again, like having to teach. Like I have to teach you like how to respect my space when
as you're being invaded at the same time.
Exactly. So I then have to make it a teachable moment. You know what I'm saying? Like make everything a teachable moment, right? I had to make it a teachable moment and tell her like, this is why you should not do this, right? And then she explained, like she not explained, but she then understood, and apologized again because it was a deeper issue. Like, she didn't realize that there was a deeper issue with her actually just touching my hair. And I'm like, how do we get to that point where we don't have to teach those things anymore? Like, why do we have to teach you to be a normal human?
Well, and it's not like they don't know this in other contexts.
Right.
Especially women. Especially women. Exactly. We don't want to be touched without giving consent. So that's when it goes back to that weird paternalistic ownership. I have the right to you. And it's, they don't realize that this is even something that is in their subconscious, but you are an extension of me, Black Americans. And that's something that I get to take from, and I get to touch, and I get to intrude upon. And there's a shock when those boundaries go up of like, what do you mean there's a boundary here? You don't get to have boundaries because I'm entitled to your existence.
And I'm just trying to learn, and you're supposed to help me. I'm here to learn. So you have to let me do all this, and you have to be nice about when you correct me.
Going back to that, like, because that's usually when like I'm an ally can come out. There's a book by Resmaa Menakem called My Grandmother's Hands, and it talks about these two historical beliefs that live within the American white supremacist narrative. And the first is that Black bodies are dangerous and must be like brought into control or like managed, right? Like I have the right to touch your hair, or If you say something I don't like, I can respond in that like really hostile way. And the second is that I also need Black bodies to soothe me, right? So like when people are really upset and then expect to be taken care of, and it's a disservice to not allow white folks to be able to settle their own selves, and like how to stand in that place as a Black person and watch the panic happen and then like put the onus on them to take care of themselves sometimes means you're like dealing with a lot of that stuff, whether it's like, and I've had it too, like I'm remembering I literally had to swat a colleague's hand because she like kept going for it, and I felt like I was doing something like blocking. I was like,
just stuff right there.
Like, can you not figure it out? And then having to assert myself, right, and like be unapologetic about it, and also watch them completely.
Because if you're tired and you don't, then you feel so awful later.
Yeah.
Yes. All this stuff, I really like, I've had a journey with it. As soon as I started teaching, I was like, I'm teaching Black and brown bodies, so I'm going to grow out my hair. You can go down my profile pictures and you'll find me with short hair. You can blackmail me with that photo later. But, I didn't realize, like, I felt like having the buzz cut that's just been me all my life. And then going through that whole process of having hair that is now super interesting. I thought like as a man, it was always immediately deemed it as like affectionate or something like that. And I was just like, okay, all right, whatever. And then I realized my own routines and the curl formers, the twists and stuff like that. And then I was really uncomfortable with it. Like I put my work, like you're gonna tell me like after a twist out, you're gonna come up in here and mess up my stuff. No. And I didn't really. But that just goes to show you how gaslighted I was. It's that sort of thing, like know that this behavior existed for a while, despite even me having short hair and me rationalizing immediately in my head, oh, they're being affectionate. That's really what it is. And then not until like I really started giving a damn about my hair did I really think of it as like an affront. And interestingly, I'm noticing it with pandemic teaching, because I've heard of like a couple teachers like on posts and stuff being like, oh, bring your best self, so you gotta take off the bonnet, put on the uniform, all that stuff. And I'm like, wait, hold on, there is something completely anti-Black about this. And that really, like, you are entitled to your hair preparation regardless. And this is an invasion of a home, kind of, really, when you talk about it. So don't, like, I like immediately when I heard that, I was like, every Wednesday we're doing deep conditioning together, guys. That's what we're doing. So bring your bonnet, put on the deep condition. We're going to do it together. If you have short hair, just bring a do-rag. You wanted to wear it on the meet anyway, so go right ahead and do it. And it's so interesting too, because the boys themselves even felt, yep. The boys themselves that have short hair, that thought of like, that thought of me as a teacher as like feminine for having it longer or whatever. That's like, they thought, wait, he's asking me to wear my do-rag? Like who the fuck is it? Who's gonna stop him? Like, because the do-rag carries a lot more weight as a symbol. I like, it's seeing that policing and discrimination sort of coming into this new light. Like, I mean, and it was like, I heard about this in happening in April, like right after the shutdowns have been put in place too. I'm like, wow, y'all really, y'all really like are so quick to just find a way to just police Black and brown bodies immediately, even when they're not in the classroom to begin with. It's just, yeah.
So I know we're getting closer to the end of our time together. Had a lot of out in the world discussions. I know, sad face. I feel bad too because I'm gonna talk to y'all forever. A little in the family discussion. I think we need to unpack a little colorism talk. I want to like give Syreeta a shout out because Syreeta and I co-present sometimes, and I feel like you and I are on the same page when it's time to talk about this stuff. And there have been some things that have come up when we're talking together that like we didn't plan to talk about it or frame it in that way. And I feel like it's been really cool to see us kind of dig deeper into that stuff together and really, you know, feel on the same page unpacking that. Like I want to, you know, obviously we represent all different colors here. And real talk, like as dark skinned as we can get is not here, right? And as light as we can get is not here, because blackness is just such a wide spectrum. But something I've noticed, like it's not exactly the same, but the white fragility that comes up when we talk about racism, when we talk about colorism. And if I were to make an analogy, when I hear colorism come up in our communities, it feels like when people talk about reverse racism, when white people talk to black people, they talk about colorism like it's a two-way thing, is the same phenomenon, which is, I'm like, something's literally happening when we're showing harmful behavior toward lighter skinned people for reasons that are based on white supremacist ideals. But colorism is not a two-way street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm glad that you brought that up. I was having this discussion in like the summer, and it still rings in my head the way that it does when you know the right words to say in a situation, like about 3 months after that situation happens. There was this discussion, and I remember one person who was white, like sort of trying to put me in my place, is like, you're not black, like you're Dominican. That removes you from blackness. But then being in another discussion that was like, you know, with a lot of Black Lives Matter protests, like I was there, I was really involved in those discussions, being like, oh, you know, thank goodness we see like Dominicans as Black people standing up. So it was just like, well, what is the truth? But I always have that, I guess I've always sort of internalized that sort of patience when it comes, when like, you know, as a lighter skinned person, I'm like, you know, sort of rejected from like the in-group conversations. I'm okay with that. Like I'm okay with that when that's coming from Black people, because that's just coming from like hurt. And that's like I would be a lot more patient with a lot more darker skinned people that, you know, sort of had thought we all grew up in this together, and you know that like that I have, that, you know, I have privilege being lighter skinned. And one of the one of the drawbacks of that is just not, you know, is just having to like be a little bit more patient when it comes to whether people of color want to include me in their in-group discussions or not. And, you know, you get to know who people are over time anyway. I'm not some sort of person trying to capitalize off of XYZ. And I'm sure there are even going to be people on this panel, like, you know, people watching this panel and being like, why is he there? You know? And, you know, I have to like, there's not a burden on me for me to be patient on that. I understand that that's just how terrible like colorism like really works. And, you know, and yeah, that's sort of been my like weird my like headspace on that.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I was similarly going to say, you know, I think a lot of those reverse colorism big feelings that us light brights tend to get in our feelings about is recognizing the difference between my hurt feelings or my feelings of rejection are not systemic oppression issues. Those are just my feelings about stuff, and I'll be okay. And one of the things that I notice happens with Brandi and I in conversations is the way that people will literally like ignore something that she said to respond to something that I've said. And
we've tracked it.
And that is like, that invisibility factor because they may perceive me as being more gentle
And
or
I'm the
more
hostile, angry
relatable to them.
one.
And I just really, I feel really strongly that it is my responsibility to check that and to decenter when those things happen, because it's all the time. And even my son sees it in his life, in terms of like, he's, you know, he has blonde hair, he has 4C hair, but it's blonde hair, and he can recognize that he gets treated differently than the other Black kids in his class from his white teachers. Recognize that presumption of innocence that his darker skin counterparts do not get to benefit from.
I was going to say, well, I'm the mother of 2 biracial Black boys, and both of my children go to school in the same district I teach in, and they're both in my orchestra program, so that's fun. But when they had short curly hair, we noticed the same thing that Syreeta was talking about, that they were treated differently than most of their darker skinned peers. And we would talk about that all the time. And then Winston started to grow his locks. And then that changed. And I had to talk to him about that, because I used to have locks as well. And so I understood this very well, but I guess as the mom, and this being my child, I'd never seen this before. So it was kind of a shock to my system that suddenly it's the same kid, but his hair looks different. So now he's being treated a little differently, and he's being lumped in with students that he hadn't been lumped in with before. Now, granted, they were his friends and stuff, but you saw them being grouped together, and even the behaviors that they would typically assign to the darker skinned students, they would also, that was problematic, by the way, they would also lump Winston into it as well. And then Miles was still like the sweet, like, oh, you know, look at sweet little Miles. And it was really interesting. So we've had a lot of talks about that. And it's definitely something that I'm learning about more, because I've never really experienced it, but to see how my children are affected has been really a ride. It's been really uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's with Black folks too. I've seen that difference, and there's this exoticizing of our biracial babies, and of those who are not unambiguously Black, that I even see in the educational system. If anyone's familiar with the Courageous Conversations protocol, like the first part of our training is to do what they call the color line, and you like talk about these privilege questions and stuff, and you line up. And I encourage everyone to really look in the book, because it's going to sound super simplistic, but what you end up with essentially is the darkest to the lightest people, with a few exceptions. And I remember talking about that color line, and then moving to a new school, and you know, with like that newly awakened awareness, just looking at who's getting fussed at, who's getting talked about, and looking along the color line. And it was just like, you know, the person who would fuss at the baby whose skin color was like mine would gush over how beautiful the biracial Black child is, and just like, you know, it's a lot.
There was an article that came out a few years ago that talked about how, I think it was in, I don't know, Time magazine, but it was saying, you know, mixed people are more intelligent than monoracial people. And people were sharing this widely as if it was like, look how wonderful life is.
That whole like best of both worlds thing.
Best of both worlds thing. Halle Berry says being biracial is a superpower. And it's just, we have to acknowledge how toxic and how truly steeped in white supremacy those kinds of exoticizing, you know, biracial, multiracial people. And that is part of why I don't identify as biracial, and I do identify as Black, because I really am trying to push back against that idea that, you know, things are better when you have the best of both worlds.
Mhm.
But even not like,
Both of my kids identify as Black, by the way. They both do. I did not see that article. Oh my God, I can't believe that came out.
It jumps into that. Like, I'm glad you name it as white supremacy, Syreeta, because it is. And it leads to that like horizontal hostility in and amongst Black folks, because it makes the qualifier for what is Black and what is not Black so narrow and impossible in every way, whether it's like skin tone, whether it's hair, whether it's eye color, like nose, like all of those things that we internalize. And then I sort of on the chocolatier end, right? Like we can start to fight in and amongst ourselves without realizing, like, number one, we get to affirm and celebrate the full spectrum of the Black diaspora. And number two, like white supremacy lives on if we're fighting about stuff like that, but it's real. It's real.
Yeah, Nicholas, you were gonna say something.
I was gonna say, like, you know, not even amongst Black people that don't, you know, consider themselves biracial, right? It's like where do we draw that line? Like I was speaking with Brandi about this, like, because I've kind of been on both sides of it. Like, so if you look at me, most people would, I guess, consider me light skinned.
You light skinned a bit,
right? But I grew up in Arizona, so like this is like my East Coast color, right? I grew up like a brown skinned kid, like
in that sun, yeah,
like very, very, very brown skin, you know. And so I didn't really like. And my mom is like, you know, she's like this color, right? And so, you know, she's like basically clear, right? And so I get to the East Coast and I, you know, go through a couple of years with no sun, and like I start, you know, I get more pale, and then people start referring to me as that light-skinned guy with the glasses, or that light-skinned guy that can sing with the glasses, and I'm like, what? Like, I'm like, the who? The who? I'm like, what are you talking about? Because like in my mind, I'm like brown skin, you know, and I've never reaped the benefits of being light skinned. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like there's a certain stigma attached to being a light skinned Black guy. Like, you know what I mean? You've seen the memes, like, you know, it sort of, it messes with my head. Like when people refer to me as light skinned, because I'm like, I'm not light skinned. I don't act a certain way. Like I don't do this, you know? And I even have to check those things within myself, right? Like really falling into those things that we consider norms, or, you know, are those I don't even know how to articulate like what it is, like really trying to dispel all of those things, because you know,
stereotypes.
The stereotype, that's the word. I couldn't think of it. Sorry.
And thank you for speaking about that within like light skin doesn't mean biracial. Right. I remember having my super simple kid mind, right? And it was never presented explicitly, but I got like this implicit messaging that if you were a certain level of lightness, it was because there was something, some other racial identity mixed in there. And I remember getting to the point of like, oh, that was weird to think that when I remember like very little elementary school, but like that messaging. And that's why when I present, I talk about like, if you fail to be explicit, implicit stuff creeps in, and it is toxic as all get out.
This has happened to me multiple times where my husband, who is Black, and I will be with our son, who looks exactly like my husband, but is blonde and has green eyes. And white people will come up to him or come up to us and go, oh, my grandson is biracial too. And I'm like, we're here. Both his parents are here.
You looking at us. Hi.
Black parents are right here. And there was one time where I was at this like mom's convention, which was my first problem. And this woman came up, can I take a picture of your son for my blog? And I said, what is your blog? This is a white woman. And she said, oh, it's called Biracial Babies. And I said, well, he's not biracial. He's Black. And she said, well, it doesn't matter. He has the right look. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And he was old enough to hear these words. So that, it's
Nope.
That's another thing, y'all. Kids hear all this stuff. You are not as quiet as you think you are. Kids are listening to you.
And he's constantly getting told about his, oh, your hair is so amazing. And when people say that, I say, I know, isn't the texture awesome? Oh, your eyes are so pretty. I know, isn't his nose awesome? Like having to constantly counter and push back against that it's a 24/7 thing.
And as parents, you know, Syreeta and Audrey and I know Franklin, you have a little one who is going to be dealing with the stuff one day. Just I feel like it really informs our teaching practices that we are in the place of having to deal with kids in our house, you know, unpacking all that stuff they hear during the day that is completely implicit in some ways, or just like visual. Like my son just talks about the visual messaging he gets because he's like my most like me, and we get into the weeds a lot. But it really helps me imagine like what is it that my kids are dealing with. And like Syreeta says she does with her son, like we got to do that with the babies too in the classroom, and like lift up all this stuff. Like I tell my babies that their skin is beautiful and their hair is beautiful, and I do it to my Black babies from a place of having that lived experience. I do it to all of them because they're all beautiful children, right? But there's like a special, I'm especially informed of what that means having my kids come home. My daughter got, you know, Target has the Black History stuff. I love me some Target. It's a little too much love. So I got my daughter a shirt that said, I'm a little magic Black girl or something, and she's virtual learning. So the teacher asks them to say like good things about their day. So she says the shirt, and the teacher reads it, and it's like, I'm a beautiful Black girl or whatever. And she sounded like really excited about the shirt. And I was like, oh, I didn't know how that was gonna go, but it went so well. I'm so glad that was the feedback she got. Because we know, we talk to educators and we've heard the responses they have to something as simple as a child having on a shirt that says they love their Blackness.
You immediately see that discomfort of like, well, you know, and then the
or
next
white
thing
isn't beautiful too. This literally has nothing to, my shirt doesn't have anything white on it. It just literally is talking about Black. That's it. That's it. It's not an affront.
I think there's so much as educators and people who love kids and are raising Black kids that we offer, and I keep saying this, but like if we can't hear it from each other, we'll never hear it from kids. And that's the wealth of these sorts of spaces, and that sort of like lived experiences that people are speaking in a way. Like we grew up in those systems, we receive those messages, we know what it looks like, we know what it feels like, we see it happening. So if we can't practice like hearing folks, we're not going to hear it from kids.
Yeah, so I know we're kind of at the end, and I wanted to leave because we're all educators and some of us are parents, just with this thing I heard from Dr. Bettina Love, who is just an amazing, she's just amazing. I was listening to an interview of hers yesterday, and the interviewee asked something about like what she imagined for like, you know, like a liberated future for the kids. And she was like, a future where like the Black babies are like, you know, I'm beautiful and I'm strong. And they just have these feelings, and it's not something that they have to fight to get, or that they have to have reinforced against a wave of showing them explicitly and implicitly that they're not. And like I have that dream too. We like sat here as adults and talked about being in all these different places of being able to, you know, like come to voice and come to knowing, and we're still on these paths, right? I'm still unpacking all this super internalized anti-Blackness from my entire childhood, and that's always being thrown at me, and I see it with my children. And I share that idea of just like, you know, one day my child will come home and say, Mommy, I want straight hair. Like maybe she'll, you know, it changes from day to day. Some days she's like, I am, you know, I'm bad. And then some days she's like, Mom, I want straight hair, like such and such. I just want that to, like, she's bad all the time, right? So I hope that that is something that just like having this talk and having people kind of have a window into in the family conversations can take from this, because we talked about that wall, and I know we probably pushed some people to that wall in this conversation, but it's really valid. And I'm so grateful for y'all being here. I'm going to just wrap up by saying again, we're Decolonizing the Music Room. You can find us at www.decolonizingthemusicroom.com. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. Please join our Facebook group. And if you are able, please do contribute, because we want to bring a lot more to a lot more teachers, and really have these voices out here and have us all connected, because everybody's doing beautiful work. Thank y'all so much.